I mean, what did Rick Bowness really think was going to happen? We recap a fight night special between the Wild and the Jets and some concerning trends heading into the postseason today on Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild part of your daily routine and your first listen each and every day. Just a reminder to make sure that you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our new episodes. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we recap a fight-filled night between the Wild and the Jets, including Dean Evason saying, "Get over here, Rick Bowness." And we'll talk about some of the things that led up to that interesting escalation at the end of the game. We'll talk about the aftermath in the case of Ryan Hartman. And we'll look at another instance last night in which the Wild had some things that did not go particularly well. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. My name is Seth Topol, your daily Minnesota Wild insider. Had a chance to see this one in person last night, and 51 combined penalty minutes in last night's game. The Jets end up getting the win they needed to clinch a postseason spot. We saw fights, we saw physicality, we saw the Wilds again do what they have over the last few games that Kirill Kaprizov has played. We saw a lot of guys kind of step back into just following the lead that Kaprizov provided. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later on here in the show, but I wanted to start with the physicality and the aftermath of it, because I found it very interesting at the end of the game that Rick Bowness essentially challenging Dean Evason at the end of the game, because Evason put Ryan Reeves, Marcus Foligno, Jake Middleton, John Merrill out on the ice. Also Connor Dewar, who got put in with that enforcer group, put them all out on the ice at the end of the game and basically said, all right, you guys are going to keep doing what you're doing. Well, we are open for business in that regard. At the end of the game, Bowness didn't like that. He said, no, you got to play your top guys at the end of the game, because, to be blunt, it seemed like the Jets maybe wanted another opportunity to try to go at Kirill Kaprizov or Marcus Johansson or otherwise. It happened early in the game. Kirill Kaprizov taking a stick to the face, Marcus Johansson taking a stick to the side. That ended up with him leaving the game, and obviously concern with his status, which now it sounds like he's just sore but should be fine going forward. But the Winnipeg Jets took plenty of liberties and have taken plenty of liberties in the last few times in which these two teams have stacked up. And so it got to a point in which the Wild finally said, enough. And you have Ryan Hartman with that hit on Nikolai Ehlers, in which he ended up getting called for a double minor. The Jets ended up retaliating for that play. And whatever your status is, whatever your thought process is on that hit, whether you think it was a dirty play by Hartman, whether you think it was just an example of one of those plays similar to what Ryan Reeves levied against Detroit earlier this season, in which you basically have a player that skates into, in this case, Ryan Hartman, without being fully aware that he is right there in front. Whatever side you are on in that discussion, this game got to the breaking point, and you had late in the game Marcus Johansson getting blasted into the boards with a stick away from the play And that was the tipping point for the Wilds. Now, some of it stemmed from Logan Stanley sending Kirill Kaprizov off the ice for several games. There was still some turnover from that. Some of the things that happened in this game as well led to a point in which Marcus Foligno, Ryan Reeves, amongst others, completely had enough. And you get those shots of Matt Boldy and Kirill Kaprizov looking like they're ready to rock. Just the all-timer from Dean Evason after Rick Bowness turns and does the finger point at Dean Evason and then calls him a little man. He says, "Oh, you're not going to fight because you're a little man." And Dean just looks at him without even missing a beat. And he shrugs and he says, "Hey, you want to go? You know where to find me. You come right over here and do it." It just, I think, hopefully sends a message that the Wild are not going to take this sort of nonsense from other teams throughout the league. The Wild were in a spot where they didn't need this game. They treated it as a dress rehearsal. We'll talk about this more in a little bit, but they treated it like a dress rehearsal with most of the regular cast in. The Jets needed this game. They had to have it in order to get into the playoffs. And it's obvious that through the early part of the game, the Jets were playing with that desperation. The Wild were matching it at points throughout the first couple of periods, and then as the hits, as the headhunting in the case of the Jets, as that started to really escalate, you saw the Wild get more and more frustrated to the point that we had those final few minutes of the game. You have just a slew of penalties that lead to both teams. And like I said, 51 penalty minutes in this game combined between the two teams. And most of that, you had 5 penalties in the first 2 periods. You have a penalty early on in the third, right away in the third. Then we get to the 11:31 mark of the third period. Hartman has the hit against Nikolai Ehlers that gets him a double minor because then him and Vladislav Nemetsnikov get into it. So 2-2 there. Then you have Nino Niederreiter, who was not particularly welcomed back in his return to the XL Energy Center. Him and Ryan Reeves get into it. Neal Pionk then gets a penalty for that cross check that the entire Wild team took exception to against Marcus Johansson. You then have Hartman again going against Brandon Dillon. Ryan Reeves fights Adam Lowry, and then Marcus Foligno just kind of ends things with a misconduct. And so, I hope, because I know this has been mentioned by some of our everydayers here on Locked On Wild. I know this has been mentioned in the comments at points throughout the season. So I'm glad we're getting to this point that it seems like at points things happen to Wild players, particularly Kirill Kaprizov, without really any retaliation. And hopefully this is kind of that line drawn in the sand of enough is enough. And anything that happens like this going forward is going to result in a closed fist, or at the very least, somebody grabbing a jersey, or at the very least, Dean Evason staring through the opposing head coach and saying, "If you want a piece, climb over the bench and come get some." I can't stress it enough how just amazingly casual and stone cold killerish Dean's reaction to that from Bowness was. And it's funny because to kind of bring things full circle, what did Bowness expect? If if his players are doing that earlier in the game and stemming from what happened the last time these two teams squared off, what does he expect is going to happen at the end of the game? Like, if you don't want to draw the ire of a team, then don't give them a reason to. Don't poke the bear. Don't hit players in the face with sticks. In Kirill Kaprizov's case. And then after the whistle, getting some shoves in to try to establish your dominance in the case of the Winnipeg Jets. Well, yeah, how'd that work out? I know they won, but boy, oh boy, you end up putting a target on your back if you do that kind of thing. And Winnipeg as wild card 2 may have put a bullseye in a place that they're not going to particularly like as the postseason rolls on. So it was chaotically entertaining at the end of the game between these two teams. Now, obviously, there's some fallout from what has happened here. So we're going to talk about Ryan Hartman's pricey night and what else we can glean going forward for the Wilds as we continue to recap the loss to the Winnipeg Jets on today's episode of Locked on Wilds after this. We all know the stresses of trying to find tickets at the last minute. The weather's getting nicer. You may decide on any given day, hey, let's go check out the Minnesota Twins, go to Target Field. Good luck finding tickets because not only are they hard to come by, but they're also super expensive the day of the event. But now the Game Time app is here to help you in all of those last-minute ticket purchases. They have tons of flash deals on last-minute tickets. They make it easy to find and buy tickets for every kind of event in your area with images of seats and a lowest price guarantee, plus event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. You can get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, plus concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day and part of your daily routine as we guide you through the rest of the season into the postseason. For your second listen today, make sure you check out the Locked on NHL podcast, as now with the Winnipeg Jets officially in the playoffs. How is the Eastern Conference postseason push looking with that wild card race coming down to the wire as well? Locked on NHL is free and available wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts or YouTube. So Ryan Hartman's going to go from probably not playing against Nashville to definitely not playing against Nashville because he had a hearing today from the Department of Player Safety. And anytime you have a hearing for the DPOS, heavy emphasis on those last three letters, anytime you have a hearing with the Department of Player Safety, you end up getting at least a one-game suspension. So Hartman not going to have it escalate any further than that, which is great news for the Minnesota Wild because that would then have meant that his suspension would have gone into the regular season. But as noted by Michael Russo, very interesting things with Hartman, as now with this latest event, he is going to now be considered a repeat offender. And that means that any further incidents are going to lead to more of a pricey fine for him going forward. It's an 18-month period in which he is deemed a repeat offender. If he's suspended again, he will lose 1/82nd of his yearly salary per game, as opposed to 1/185th. So they go from a per game basis to a per days of the season. But again, Hartman suspended. Neal Pionk was not. He was fined the maximum allotted amount, which is $5,000 for the cross check to Marcus Johansson. So Hartman gets hit with the heavy one. Pionk gets a parking ticket, essentially. And it further kind of reinforces this overall notion that Department of Player Safety applies in particular circumstances, but really by and large not in a lot of others. It just such uneven assessment of penalties, of suspensions, of anything discipline-wise that could help kind of enforce some of these rules. And so obviously the big one is the fact that Hartman now will serve that suspension against Nashville. He probably wasn't going to play anyway, but at least now you don't have to worry about him missing game one against whoever the Wild will play because you've already got Joel Eriksson Ek out of the lineup. If you would have had Hartman out, Sam Steele continuing to work his way back from illness, you are way shorthanded in a very critical area for this team. So you have that, and it's unfortunate that you can have a guy in Pionk who, look, I saw arguments that those plays happen all the time in the NHL. It's just that one happens to be caught and shown after the hit by Hartman on Ehlers. But here's the other part of this. You can't question Pionk's intent there. The play is not even remotely close to where Johansson's at. And yet all of a sudden Pionk just comes flying through and levies that stick hit right against the boards. You know what it is by how it looks. If it looks bad, that's probably a good sign that it was intended to send a bit of a message. So banner day for Department of Player Safety, but at least the good news is that Hartman is not going to miss any additional time due to that hit. So all in all, we now have seen Marc-Andre Fleury fully ready to go to war with Jordan Binnington. That was denied. Dean Evason fully ready to go to war with Rick Bowness. That was denied. What's going to be next? Who is Billy Guerin going to step up against here in the postseason? Of course, talking in jest. But honestly, is there another coach GM combo in the league that you would be less inclined to go toe-to-toe with on the ice, in the back parking lot, down the tunnel after the game? Guerin, always known as an enforcer throughout his time in the NHL. Dean Evason had 1,000 career penalty minutes in his time in the NHL. He looks like he's ready to put somebody through a wall every time he's sitting on the bench. Only coach I can think of off the top of my head is Rod Brind'Amour, but that guy is built like a brick house. So I don't know. Maybe there are a few beyond that you would not want to get on the wrong side of. But Dean has got to be near the top of the list. Just the most casual, bring it, I have ever seen. So fun night, and obviously a lot of chaotic energy. Glad to hear that Hartman is not going to miss any additional time other than the Nashville game. But we got to finish today's episode by talking about another trend that we are seeing now that Kirill Kaprizov is back into the fold. And so we're going to finish today's episode by talking about Passengeritis. We'll talk about that after this here on Locked On Wild. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day and part of your daily routine. Make sure for your second listen, you check out Game to Game for the NHL to get the full lowdown on all of the most important games from all of our local NHL hosts. Game to Game NHL is available on your favorite podcast platforms, absolutely free of charge. Saw it again against the Winnipeg Jets. We saw it. We've seen it a lot this year. When Kirill Kaprizov is in the lineup, and again, you want to have Kirill Kaprizov in the lineup. That's not disputed. Just a lot of guys who kind of are comfortable stepping into that secondary role. Against Chicago, no Kirill in the lineup. You had the Matt Boldy line step up and contribute 3 goals en route to the win there. Kirill goes into the lineup against Winnipeg. Kirill is the only one that gets the goal. He scores right in front. It's the only goal the Wild scored. Now, you had Matt Zuccarello, you had Connor Dewar. There was one other instance in which the Wild missed just a completely empty net because Connor Hellebuck had committed elsewhere, was sprawled out in the crease, was just generally flopping around out there. So, yes, I am saying this while also trying to kind of hedge my bets in that if 1 or 2 of those goals actually go in, then we're talking about a completely different game. But they didn't. And this is going to be, we have a ton of playoff coverage coming up for you starting next week. We've got our full 5-person roundtable with the regulars for Locked On Wild. So we'll have that coming up for you. We're going to have a crossover preview of the series with whichever, either Locked On Avalanche or Locked On Stars. So we'll have that coming up for you. We're going to talk with Kevin Gorg next week as well. So we got a lot coming at you for postseason coverage starting up next week. But one of the things that we will touch on, and one of the things that the everydayers of this show have heard quite a bit and have been absolutely right on. Kirill is not going to be able to do it all himself. Saw it against St. Louis in the postseason last year. We've seen it time and time again this year. And so, yes, it's great that he is able to handle a lot of the load, but those guys have to step it up. Those guys on that second line and all the way down the lineup, you have to be able to play the way you did with him out of the lineup as with him in the lineup, because otherwise then teams just throw their whole defensive scheme at Kirill Kaprizov because they don't have to worry about anybody else. You don't have to worry about the Matt Boldy line being able to get anything going. If you have multiple lines that are threatening to score and or scoring, okay, now you've got the Boldy line heating up. Well, we got to devote some defensive attention and some physical attention to slowing those guys down. Every line that is able to contribute to the overall offense and the overall scoring, that pulls attention away from the Kaprizov line. And that extends to the guys on Kirill's line as well. It's been a rough stretch for Matt Zuccarello. Without Kirill, everybody that is expected to carry the offensive load for this team is going to have to step up and be able to help. Not only help, but be able to contribute too. It's one thing to say, well, they looked good. You still got to get the goals. So that Boldy line is going to be essential. Matt Zuccarello finding his form again is going to be essential. Ryan Hartman helping those two out, being a solid contributor to that first line is going to be essential for this team to avoid the exact same thing we saw in last year's postseason. And not only that, but look at the way that the goals were scored from the Winnipeg Jets in last night's game. Bad rebound control You have one that caroms out to the left of the net. Fleury had gone into a sprawl to try to save the initial shot, but the rebound comes free right to a waiting Winnipeg Jets player, tapped in for the goal. Second goal, same thing. Third goal, I am going to not really hold a lot of judgment on that goal because I do think Matt Boldy should have drawn a penalty on the other end, and it just seemed like the frustration. It's a good learning experience, though, too. The frustration of not getting that call boiled over, which led to the Jets going down and scoring that third and ended up being the backbreaker goal. It's a good learning lesson, too, that if you are expecting a call that doesn't come, just get up and go continue the game. So that sort of thing is concerning as well, and I think it's why Filip Gustavsson is going to be a bigger key to this series, because Filip Gustafsson's tendencies, if he is able to get any portion of a puck, he's going to ice it, and that just leads to less of those extended messes in front of the net and prevents a lot of those second, third opportunities that have led to goals. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's just an overall tendency, overall theme with Fleury out there in net, in that this team just seems to not be able to do as well with rebound control when Fleury is between the pipes, which is weird to say because you know that Fleury is going to kick him out to try to keep play moving. So you would think that you'd have to be on your absolute best with rebound control when Fleury's in the net, but it has not been good over the last handful of starts. And with Gustafsson, if he gets the puck, he's going to ice it. So like flip your style as I attempt to flip my computer here. Flip your style. Be ready for those rebounds when Fleury's in net, and just try to make sure that nobody can grab one away from Gustafsson when he's in the net. And to close today, much like they say in spring, in like a lion, out like a lamb, we're seeing some of that here to end the season. And I know there are factors at play here. Joel Eriksson's injury has led to the Wild being more cautious to try to ensure that additional players don't get injured to where the Wild then are missing several key pieces heading into the postseason. I know that with the way that Dallas and Colorado have been playing, that it was going to be a tall order to catch them and to stay at the top of the Central Division, where the Wilds, let's not forget, the Wild were in first place outright after the game against the Colorado Avalanche, in which they beat the Avs 4-2. Since then, the Wild lost to Vegas 4-1, lost to Vegas in a shootout 4-3, lost to Pittsburgh 4-1. They beat the Blues and the Blackhawks, and they lost to Winnipeg 3-1. You've got Vegas, who is trying to continue to propel themselves towards a deep postseason run here again this season. That's just what Vegas does. You have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who were in a situation where they absolutely had to win in order to keep their postseason hopes alive at that point. Their postseason hopes are pretty much completely dead at this point. But at that point, they absolutely needed that game. The Chicago Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues have nothing but pride to play for. And let's not forget, the Wild had a ton of regulars out of the lineup, but Chicago dominated that game through pretty much 2 periods. And then the Wild were able to kind of regain their footing and get the win there. And then you have the Winnipeg Jets. Absolute must-win game, and they have stretches of the game where they dominate. The Wild end up losing there too. The Wild are trending in a less than ideal direction as we move towards the postseason. I would like to see in future circumstances, future situations here, I would like to see a team that says, okay, we're playing a team that is desperate to win. They're going to play desperate. We're going to play spoiler. We are going to prevent them from getting to where they want to get because of where we're at. And it's just, it's a worry heading into the postseason is, are the Wild going to be able to just flip the switch and get back to where they were at? Now, the Wild went in relatively hot last year. I think they ended the season 12-2 going into the postseason. And how'd that work out? I still believe this year's team is more built to win in the postseason than last year's was. So we'll have to see if the Wild are able to indeed flip that switch and get back to playing their brand of hockey here as the postseason gets going, because these last few games, these last 6 games, a lot of bodies in, a lot of bodies out, a lot of uninspiring play by and large during that stretch. So how it ends, we'll see. And that will do it for today's episode of Locked on Wild. Now that your first listen of the day is done, again, make sure you check out Game to Game NHL to get the full lowdown on the biggest games throughout the NHL as we finish up the regular season this week. Game to Game NHL is available on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms. You can find Locked on Wild on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube as well. So make sure you take the time to join our everydayers and be part of the conversation on YouTube. Be part of the Locked on Wild experience by following along with our new episodes every day of the week, as well as our pre- and post-game content as well. All it takes is a follow. All it takes is a subscribe and a turning on of the notifications. You'll never miss out on a new episode again. So make sure you do as we guide you towards the postseason with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.